So this video is going to be focused on using pose-to-pose animation instead of straight ahead frame by frame animation. So it's very similar, there's a lot of overlap, but it does afford some other options while you are working. Before I begin animating, you're going to have no layers selected. I'm going to click on the little plus and I will choose color card. When I do that, of course, it gives me the checkerboard telling me that's a color card layer. We can see it's now behind. Now I go to my drawing layer. I've added a layer called lines that I'm going to be working with to do my drawing. And remembering that if we want to make our brush size bigger or smaller, hold down the O key and it can get big or it can get smaller while you are working. And I'm using a tablet, so I do have pressure sensitivity turned on with it. So a couple of things while we are working here that we will want to keep in mind is, and one of the reasons that I have chosen to use a new color is after I do my animation, if I go through and change that color, it will update that color everywhere in my entire animation, not just on the current active frame. So that's one of the advantages, and we will start learning about using color palettes and how that works in coming sessions. But right now we're going to just focus on the basics of the animation. So what we want to think about today while we are working is thinking in terms of the concepts of squash and stretch. So hopefully you remember some of the examples that you've seen in the video where things will stretch, things will move. And as we do that, what we try and think of is we still have a general overall consistent mass or form. So if something starts out this big, it doesn't stretch and get that big, but if it's going to stretch, it needs to stretch itself so it becomes like this object has stretched to become thinner, or if it's going to squash itself, because what we're trying to do is maintain a similarity or consistency of mass or form. On this particular assignment, you're going to be working on animating a blob or a sack. So think about it, you have some type of sack form that you are working with. So you can think in terms of it's a sack, it's a pillow, it's a blob, it's something. So I've started out with a neutral shape or position. So when we're animating pose to pose, what we're trying to think about doing is, okay, where do I want to end up? So from this, I'm going to spend a little bit of time with my sack. It's going to adjust and wiggle itself a little bit. Then it's going to stretch up high, squash down, and then roll over. So I'm thinking through kind of the core bits of what I want this to become. Now, one way that I can do that is I can go and just create my different primary poses and then add drawings in between. I also can just create my primary poses on these frames, and then I can go and move them over and then fill in the gaps. And that's the way that I prefer to work on it, because when I do it that way, I don't have the big gaps and I can start to get a sense of my overall animation for what I want. So the next key pose is where it's going to be stretched up, and I'm going to kind of imagine that these corners are the feet for this bag. So these are the feet, and as it stretched itself up, that's going to stretch out. And now as it moves up, so I'm imagining it's the same overall volume or shape. Now if I want, as I animate and develop it. Once I have the core of the body down, I can go back and maybe I want to put a hint of a face or something else onto this sack. So as the sack stretches up, now the sack, as it's going to come down, so we have the feet, and I'm just picturing in my head how it's folding, it's going to fold over onto itself as it squishes down. And then next key pose, it's going to roll over. And not quite sure which frame ended up there, but we want to be here. So I'm working out the core bits of my animation. I'm thinking about the poses. We could also think in a more complex animation of, say, baseball pitchers, so that they're standing on the mound, then they wind up, and that's going to be a pose, and then they draw back, and then they throw the ball. So each one of those would be key poses. And in the olden days of animation, the lead animators would animate mostly the key poses, and the junior animators would, though, go and fill in the drawings in between. So they would create it. So the key animators would figure out the timing for what you want. So now I can select these frames. I can even just drag it out with it. Turn off onion skinning for now. I don't want it on. Now, to fill the gap here, one thing I can do is use the function key F5. So I'm using F5. So F5, the function key, as a way to fill that gap. What I want to do here is kind of work on timing. So he's kind of wiggling around, figuring out. It's going to stretch a little bit. Now the sinking down might go a little bit faster. So as we sink down, and then the roll, we're going to let that be a slow movement. And I'm just click dragging on those frames. And again, I didn't drag quite right, so it didn't get, so function F5 gives me the gap. And then as I've rolled, and then we move into that finished frame. So now that gives me a start, and I can even go through and play my animation to get a sense of timing. Am I happy with that? Do I like it? How's it working out? Now, to get from the opening frame to there, that's where we finally get to start animating. What we may find is we don't have to animate each and every frame, but I will instead choose specific frames that I want to work on as part of this. So I might let it sit there for a couple frames. So there's a real, we can see the real hint of what's going on there with that. Green meaning it's coming up in the future. Now, to be able to draw this frame, what I can do is insert an empty drawing right here. So when I insert it, it now shows me the previous, it's that, And I can also take the frames that are there, and now we know we don't want them. So now I have an empty drawing, and I'm going to then look at what I have there. And using the onion skinning allows me to figure out how I want to get to that next frame in my drawing. And when we have these drawings that we can follow, kind of having the distance between them, trying to get to that finished drawing. So I'm able to progressively build up, and I didn't like where that landed. You can also see that's not my strong hand position. That pushing up did not seem to go particularly well. And now we're very close to where we want to be. So the using the pose to pose allows us to more effectively transition and figure out how we want to get somewhere. So now when I hit play, we can see how it rises up. I'm going to hold that for a little bit. I think I want to give myself, and this is, again, going back to we need time for animation to occur, so I need to allow myself that time. So there I highlighted the frames, so it's going to sit here unchanging for a moment, and then it's going to very quickly lower itself back down. So I turn on the onion skinning, and I can see, so I've given myself 4 frames to get down. So if we go a quarter of the distance each time, so there's 1, and now this will be 2, and then 3, and this will be the 4th, and then we're to there. So we can see, so it moves down, down, down. I might want a frame in between there to indicate how that kind of transition or fold is occurring, but it happens pretty quick, so we might be able to get away with not doing that. But now I can rewind, and we can see how the animation is starting to take shape. So if we get to a point I'm down here, and then we're going to roll over, even in the down, okay, we're right here, and I'm just going to highlight those frames now because I don't want to have them there. We'll just have a couple frames like this, and turn on the onion skinning so I can see where I'm going to try and go. Now I can go and grab, and this is where it takes a little bit of precision. I'm going to go and grab and say I want my onion skin to show me a little bit more forward, so I grab the green and pull it out. Now I can rewind here, and now I can see that faint green occurring inside my scene. And now we had a little zoom issue there where I accidentally zoomed. So now I have to figure out how I want to start moving my way across. So I know I kind of want that. Now if we think in terms of middle, that's going to give me that middle to be able to fall into. Now if we go find the middle of the middle, and because that's a duplicating frame there, we can just hit delete on it, and now I can go create the drawing that's in between. So we kind of are getting this roll effect. So it moves as we work our way across. So the key thing that you're doing is you're coming up with your poses, you stretch them out, and then you are moving through the animation, adding in frames, but don't be afraid to let something rest 3, 4, 5, 6 frames so we can process what we've seen, because even right now you can see that that roll is really too fast. It's happening so quickly, we need to, I think, space it out.